All right, let's jump right in. We're taking a deep dive into Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential thinkers in Western philosophy.
One of the giants, absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're going to approach Augustine like we're explaining him to another philosopher.
Yeah, someone already familiar with the big names and the big ideas.
Exactly. So we can really get into the intricacies of his arguments.
And to guide us, we've got excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Augustine.
Always a good starting point.
So what makes Augustine so fascinating, at least for me, is that he tackles these huge philosophical questions: knowledge, evil, happiness. But he does it all through the lens of his Christian faith.
Yeah, you can't separate his philosophy from his theology. They're completely intertwined. For Augustine, they're all part of the same pursuit.
It's like he's building this whole philosophical system where faith and reason, they're not at odds with each other.
Right. They actually support and illuminate each other, which is a pretty radical idea for his time.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that Augustine was deeply immersed in that classical philosophical tradition.
Well, absolutely. He was a master of rhetoric, steeped in Cicero and all those Roman thinkers.
So he's got this deep understanding of classical philosophy.
Yeah. And he was also grappling with Stoicism, Neoplatonism. He saw in them these echoes of truth.
But also some potential pitfalls.
Exactly. And that's what makes Augustine such a fascinating bridge between the classical world and this emerging Christian intellectual landscape.
He's standing at this crossroads.
Yeah, pulling from both sides.
So let's start with something that might surprise some folks.
Huh.
Augustine, this devout Christian thinker, he actually uses skepticism as a starting point in his quest for certainty.
It's true. It's not the kind of skepticism that leads to, complete doubt, though.
No, not total nihilism.
Or more like a way to clear the ground, a way to figure out what we can really know without a shadow of a doubt.
To get down to those bedrock certainties.
Yeah, exactly. And he has this brilliant cogito-like argument centuries before Descartes, where he says, if I am mistaken, I exist.
Whoa, that's powerful.
Right. It's this bedrock certainty. Even if I doubt everything else, I can't doubt my own existence as a thinking being.
So even for a total skeptic, there's at least one unshakable truth.
Right, the reality of their own existence.
But Augustine doesn't stop there. He goes on to identify other truths that he sees as equally certain.
Like what?
Mathematical truths, logical principles, and fundamental moral intuitions.
Ah, so the things that seem self-evident, undeniable.
Exactly. And for Augustine, all these certainties, they point towards a higher source.
God?
Exactly. He sees God as the ultimate guarantor of truth, the ground of all being and knowing.
The foundation of everything.
This brings us to one of Augustine's most intriguing ideas, his theory of elimination.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
It's a complex theory, drawing on Neoplatonic interpretations of Plato's theory of recollection. But the basic idea is that true knowledge isn't something we just passively receive from the outside world.
There's more to it than just sensory experience.
Right. It involves an active consultation with an inner teacher.
An inner teacher?
Yeah, this divine light that illuminates our minds and helps us grasp truth.
So it's like we have this innate capacity to understand truth.
And that capacity is sparked by a divine light.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So it's not just about observing the world around us.
Right, it's about engaging with it intellectually, testing our understanding against these inherent standards of truth that are implanted in us by God.
So knowledge isn't just about sensory data.
It's about this dynamic interplay between our perception, our reason, and this divine illumination that guides our understanding.
Like a three-way dance.
Precisely. And this is where Augustine's emphasis on the will comes into play. It's not enough to simply be exposed to truth.
We have to choose to seek it.
Yeah, to actively turn our minds towards the light.
So true knowledge requires this intellectual and spiritual effort.
This willingness to engage with the world in a way that's open to divine guidance.
Absolutely. And this emphasis on the will becomes even more crucial when we start talking about Augustine's views on faith and reason.
Because for Augustine, faith isn't about blind acceptance.
It's about seeking understanding.
Exactly. This faith-seeking understanding, as he puts it.
He criticizes both blind faith, which rejects reason, and arrogant rationalism, which denies the need for faith.
It's about finding that balance.
Right, because for Augustine, faith and reason are not enemies.
They're partners in the pursuit of truth.
And this leads us to another key aspect of Augustine's thought, his understanding of the human person,
He sees us as this composite of body and soul,
with the soul being the immaterial, immortal essence of who we are.
the core of our being.
And unlike some other thinkers who focus solely on the soul's journey, Augustine firmly believes in the resurrection of the body.
The body matters.
Absolutely. He sees the ultimate fulfillment of the human person as involving both body and soul.
So the body isn't just some temporary vessel for the soul.
It's an integral part of who we are, and its resurrection is essential for our complete happiness in the afterlife.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Augustine's anthropology, his idea of the mind as an image of God.
Image of God. That's a powerful concept.
He's not just using it metaphorically. He's making a specific philosophical point about the structure of the human mind.
Interesting. So how does that work?
He develops this triadic model of cognition that reflects the Trinity.
A triadic model.
Yeah, so you have the object of knowledge, the cognitive faculty itself, and the will that directs our attention.
Okay, so it's like a three-part harmony.
Each element playing a crucial role in the act of knowing.
So we've got this dynamic interplay between what we perceive, our capacity to understand it, and the will that chooses to focus on it.
Exactly. And Augustine argues that this capacity for self-reflection, for knowing our own minds, this is what sets us apart as humans.
Self-awareness as the key to our uniqueness.
It's the key to our ability to know and love God.
Because in knowing ourselves, we come to recognize that we are finite, limited beings.
And that our ultimate fulfillment lies in something beyond ourselves.
Precisely, Augustine sees this self-knowledge as the starting point for our journey towards God.
So we've covered some pretty big ground here. We've seen how Augustine uses skepticism to arrive at certain knowledge, how his theory of illumination sheds light on the process of knowing,
and how his view of the human person emphasizes both the soul and indeed the body, with the mind serving as this reflection of the divine.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Augustine's thought is so rich and multifaceted, we could spend hours unpacking these initial ideas.
I think we've given our philosophical listener a good foundation, though.
Yeah, a foundation for understanding the key elements of Augustine's philosophical system.
And it highlights how he brings together faith and reason, philosophy and theology in his quest for understanding.
All part of the same journey for Augustine.
Absolutely. So Augustine, this idea of the two cities, it's one of his most thought-provoking ideas.
Definitely. It's a framework that goes way beyond like traditional political philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. We're not talking about physical cities here, like empires or nations.
And it's deeper than that.
It's about two fundamental ways of living, two orientations of the heart, you could say.
Two competing loves that drive human action.
Exactly. Two ultimate allegiances that shape our lives, our destinies.
He calls them the city of God and the earthly city.
And each city represents, a set of values, a way of seeing the world.
So the city of God, it's characterized by love of God, a desire for eternal truths.
A longing for union with the divine.
And the earthly city.
Well, it's driven by self-love, a pursuit of worldly pleasures, power.
A kind of forgetfulness of our true end.
You could say that.
And this isn't just some abstract philosophical theory for Augustine. He sees this conflict playing out all throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. In the rise and fall of empires, the clash of ideologies, even within the individual soul.
It's everywhere.
And remember, Augustine lived through a period of immense upheaval in the Roman Empire.
Yeah, the world was changing around him.
He saw firsthand the fragility of earthly power, the destructive consequences of unchecked ambition.
He was writing The City of God right after the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410.
An event that shook Roman society to its core.
So he's not just theorizing about these two cities. He's seeing their clash in real time.
And grappling with the implications for both individuals and societies.
And what makes this concept so challenging, I think, is that the distinction between the two cities isn't always clear-cut.
Yeah, it's not like you can just look at someone and know for sure which city they belong to.
It's not about outward appearances.
It's about the inner orientation of the heart.
The deepest motivations.
The things that drive our choices.
So someone could appear outwardly virtuous. They could perform good deeds, uphold moral standards.
But inwardly, they might be driven by self-love.
A desire for recognition, not genuine love of God.
Augustine is very attuned to those complexities of human motivation.
He gets it. He understands that our hearts are often a battleground.
Between these competing loves,
So we've got these two cities, two fundamental ways of living.
constantly interacting, sometimes clashing.
Where does Augustine see this conflict ultimately leading?
He believes that history is moving towards a final judgment,
A separation of the two cities.
a grand culmination where the true allegiances of each heart are revealed.
Okay, so it's like a cosmic sorting?
You could put it that way.
The wheat separated from the chaff.
And this is where Augustine's ideas about predestination and the transformative power of grace come into play.
So he believes that those who belong to the city of God, they'll be saved,
Not because of their own merits,
but because of God's grace.
his free and undeserved grace.
But this raises so many questions, right? If God has already chosen, who will be saved?
What about human freedom? Do our choices even matter?
If our ultimate destiny is already determined.
These are questions Augustine wrestled with throughout his work.
And his answers are complex, often debated.
They offered a really profound perspective, though, on the relationship between divine sovereignty and human freedom.
So how does Augustine reconcile this idea of predestination with the belief that we have genuine freedom of choice?
It's a paradox, no doubt. But Augustine argues that before the fall, humans possessed a perfect freedom
A freedom to choose the good.
and not to sin.
But through Adam's sin, we lost that freedom.
We inherited a kind of bent towards sin, a weakened will that makes us inclined to choose evil.
So our free will is real.
But it's damaged, corrupted by original sin.
And that's where grace comes in.
Grace doesn't eliminate our free will, it restores it,
It heals our brokenness.
empowers us to choose the good.
So it's not about being forced to do good,
It's about having our wills realigned with God's will.
being empowered to choose what's truly good for us.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important distinction that Augustine makes.
Okay, what's that?
He differentiates between two types of freedom.
Two types.
Yeah, there's freedom of choice.
The ability to choose between different options.
Right. And then there's a higher freedom.
Oh, what's
The freedom to choose what is truly good. The freedom to love God and live according to his will.
So even if we have freedom of choice, we might not be truly free.
If our choices are driven by fear, self-interest, a desire for things that ultimately don't satisfy,
It's about aligning our wills with God's will.
finding our happiness in him.
And that's only possible through grace.
It is.
This reminds me of Augustine's famous quote, "Love God and do as you please."
Ah, yes. It suggests that once our love for God is rightly ordered, our actions will naturally flow from that love.
True freedom isn't about following a set of external rules,
It's about an inner transformation.
a reorientation of the heart.
That leads to a spontaneous and joyful obedience to God's will.
Okay, so we've explored the two cities, the role of grace, Augustine's complex view of free will.
It's a lot to take in.
But how does all of this connect to Augustine's philosophical anthropology, his understanding of the human person?
That's a key point. Augustine's political and social thought, his ideas about history, the destiny of humanity, they're all grounded in his understanding of who we are as human beings.
It all goes back to that,
And at the heart of that understanding is his idea of the mind as an image of God,
a reflection of the divine Trinity.
possessing a capacity for reason, for self-awareness, for love, that sets it apart from the rest of creation.
And this capacity, though marred by sin,
It's ultimately what makes us capable of knowing and loving God.
the key to our salvation, our ultimate happiness.
Absolutely. And this is where Augustine's own personal journey, his struggles with doubt and desire, become so illuminating.
He understands the complexities of the human heart,
The battle between flesh and spirit.
the longing for something that transcends the limits of this world.
His philosophy is born out of this deep inner struggle.
This wrestling with the big questions of life and faith.
That lived experience, that authenticity, it's what makes his work so compelling.
Even centuries later.
He's not just offering abstract theories, he's speaking from a place of deep personal conviction.
A profound understanding of the human condition. Wow, we've really been through it with Augustine, haven't we? Knowledge, the human person, those two cities battling it out across history.
Yeah, we even tackled grace, predestination, free will, stuff that's kept philosophers and theologians arguing for centuries.
It's amazing how a thinker from so long ago can still get people fired up.
That just shows you how powerful Augustine's thought really is. His ideas had a huge impact on both philosophy and theology, shaped the whole Western intellectual tradition.
Yeah, his fingerprints are everywhere. So where do we even start tracing that legacy? What are the big areas where his influence is most obvious?
Well, in philosophy, you can't ignore his theory of knowledge, divine illumination, the active role of the will. That's been super influential.
We see echoes of that in Descartes, right? That I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. And even later, thinkers like Wittgenstein grappling with language and meaning, they were engaging with Augustine's ideas too.
It's like Augustine gave us a whole framework for thinking about mind, world, God.
Yeah.
And we're still working with that framework today.
Absolutely. And in theology, Augustine's impact is even bigger. His ideas on grace, predestination, the nature of sin, they were foundational for Christian thought, especially in the
He's
West.
basically the father of Western theology, right?
Pretty much. His writings were key for developing doctrines in the Catholic Church, and his influence is all over Protestant denominations, too. Thinkers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, they were all grappling with Augustine.
So no matter what branch of Christianity you're talking about, Augustine's there in the background.
He set the terms of the debate for centuries. Even people who disagreed with him had to deal with his ideas.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly influential figure who shaped both philosophy and theology. But like with any great thinker, there's some baggage.
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some complexities, some controversies. Augustine's views on certain things, like using force in matters of faith, or his pronouncements on women and sexuality, those haven't aged so well.
Yet, some of his ideas are pretty tough to swallow from a modern perspective.
Definitely. We have to approach his work critically, Recognize the brilliance of his insights, but also acknowledge the limitations of his historical context.
So, appreciate him, but don't idolize him. Learn from his strengths, but be aware of his weaknesses.
Exactly. Read Augustine with a hermeneutic of charity A&D critique. We can learn a lot from him, but we can't just take everything he says at face value.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Augustine, what are the big takeaways for us as philosophers today?
Well, I think Augustine reminds us that philosophy isn't just this heady intellectual game. It's about grappling with the big questions. What is knowledge? What does it mean to be happy? How do we live a good life? What's the relationship between faith and reason? These are questions that Augustine lived with, struggled with, and his journey gives us an example of how to engage those questions rigorously, interpersonally.
I love that. He doesn't shy away from the big stuff, and he's not afraid to admit he doesn't have all the answers. There's a humility there, a willingness to wrestle with doubt, but he never stopped searching for a deeper understanding.
And that's such a crucial lesson for any philosopher. Augustine shows us that pursuing truth takes intellectual rigor, but it also takes openness to the mystery of existence.
It's about using both our heads and our hearts to engage with the world.
And that's a legacy worth holding on to.
Absolutely. Our deep dive into Augustine of Hippo has been a journey through some of the deepest, most challenging ideas in Western thought.
And I'm walking away with a real sense of awe at how complex and insightful this guy was.
Me too. To all our fellow philosophers out there, keep exploring Augustine. His ideas might be ancient, but they still have something to say to us today.
Happy exploring.